Hi guys, so welcome back. So still on relevant costing, and we are now on illustrative example 4, which is really a make or buy decision. And even though it seems like it's a different decision, but the principle is still the same. And the principle is, what is the cash flows under the one decision, and what's the cash flows under the next decision, and or alternatives rather. And if the cash flows differ between the two alternatives, therefore that will be relevant cash flows, and then effectively you add up the relevant cash flows, and that will give you the answer that or the decision that you need to make. Alright, so in this case it's make or buy. So again, what is the two alternatives here? We either make or we buy. So Manyani, I operate a lodge, and Conference in Limpopo, they're currently evaluating the possibility of outsourcing the catering at the lodge. Instead of doing the catering themselves, they're going to outsource it, or considering to outsource it. They have prepared the following cost schedule and have also expressed the cost on a per head basis based on current levels of 5,000 heads. So there we have cost of meals, catering labor, variable catering overheads, and fixed catering overheads. So, and these costs are all based on 5,000 per head, and if you divide these costs by 5,000, effectively you get those amounts. Alright, just one thing to note, that a fixed cost does not, so in other words, even though they've allocated the fixed cost to a per head, this fixed cost is not dependent on the number of heads, because that's the definition of a fixed cost. A fixed cost does not change with, in this case, the heads, the number of people, whereas all these costs, variable catering overheads, catering labor, cost of meals, they will all be changed with the number of heads, because they are all variable costs. Alright, but just bear in mind that fixed costs will not necessarily change, and in this case it's quite important because we are dealing with relevant costing here, which is a future differential cash flow. Fixed overheads typically will not change, even if you take one alternative over another. So fixed overheads typically will not be relevant. Alright, but let's look at the detail of this question. So a catering organization has offered to do the catering at an all-inclusive price of 85 Rand per head. Catering will be done at the lodge. Should Manyani accept the catering organization offer, 40% of the catering labor can be relieved with no retrenchment costs. The other 60% will be transferred to other parts of the organization where they can be productively employed. These positions will not be created if the organization does not outsource. Right, so fixed catering overheads comprise of an allocation of the rental for the eating areas that Manyani pays to the landlords of the lodge. So again, this just tells you that fixed catering overheads is actually just the allocation. It does not change based on the number of heads. And then it says assume all figures are annual. So almost all these questions, you identify what's the alternatives. We have two alternatives. We either continue catering ourselves, or we outsource the catering. So it's the cash flows under catering ourselves, and the cash flows under catering. So if you have a look at our cost based on the tables, 111, the outsourcer is going to charge us 85. So it may look like, well, 85 is cheaper than what we're currently paying, but it's better to plot the cash flows for ourselves first in terms of what's relevant and what's not, to see if it's really so much better to go with the outsourcer, especially since I mentioned that fixed costs can be misleading because it cannot really be allocated to a per head in this case. So if we make or outsource ourselves, we will have to incur the meals. We have to incur both the 40% labor. So we have to incur the meals if we make it ourselves. If we outsource, we incur nothing. So the differential is 250. So that 250 is therefore relevant. The same with the 40% labor. Remember, the 40% labor can be released if we outsource. So in other words, if we don't outsource, we have to pay it. If we outsource, we pay nothing. So therefore that 50,000 is differential, which makes it relevant. However, the 60,000 labor, the 60% will be transferred to other parts of the organization. So in other words, effectively we're still going to have to pay for them whether we outsource or not. So that's actually irrelevant. So as we'll see here, 60%, which is the 75,000, we'll pay whether we outsource ourselves, make it ourselves, or outsource the catering. So therefore that is no differential, which is irrelevant. Then we have variable catering overheads. The definition of a variable cost is that it's a cost that changes with production. If we cater ourselves, we will have to incur that overheads. If we don't cater ourselves, we don't incur it. So therefore the differential is 100,000, and therefore that makes it relevant. Then the catering fees, if we do the catering ourselves, obviously we don't pay the catering fees, but if we outsource, we have to pay the catering fees, and so therefore that difference of 425,000 is relevant. And then the fixed catering overheads, remember that's an allocated cost, which simply just means that it gets incurred whether you cater or not. So therefore it's an irrelevant cost. And if we add up all the relevant cash flows, you're going to get to 25,000 positive, and you can ignore this differential column and just simply look at these totals, and you'll see if we outsource, if we do the catering ourselves, we're going to incur costs of 555,000. If we outsource, we incur costs of 580,000. Now I would rather incur costs of 555 than incur costs of 580. So we would be better off if we do the catering ourselves by 25,000. So based on the numbers here, the recommendation would be to do the catering ourselves and not outsource, which is very interesting, because if you looked at face value, it looked like it's 111 per person. The outsourcer was charging 85. Surely the 85 looks cheaper, but again, fixed cost is misleading. So let's rather always try to plot, even though it takes longer, the relevant and the irrelevant cash flows, and then total what the relevant cash flows will be, and therefore we can make a more informed decision. Alright, so when we come back, the last decision we're going to do is closing down or continuing. Alright, see you soon guys, cheers.